They wanna give him 109 for following the legal line. Bitcoin Jesus paid his dues. Now they tryna make him lose. Free beer, can't silence the truth. Free beer, breaking their own rules. Free beer, from prison to Spain. Now they're doing it again. First investor in the game, now they wanna kill his flame. Hired lawyers did it right, still they wanna pick a fight. Core devs changed the protocol. Government wants total control. Attorney-client privilege dead. Using compliance plans instead, yeah. First investor in the game, now they wanna kill his flame. Hired lawyers did it right, still they wanna pick a fight. Core devs changed the protocol. Government wants total control. Attorney-client privilege dead. Using compliance plans instead, yeah. Free beer. Free beer. Blockstream got the way back then. 1 meg blocks, remember when? Big blocks meant decentralized. Small blocks kept us paralyzed. Now they're coming for the king, using laws like puppet strings. Spanish prison, McAfee died, making sure Veer stays inside. They can raid the lawyers, what? They can seize the files, yeah. But they can't stop crypto, running wild, running wild. Brownstone dropping truth bombs daily. System going crazy lately. Trying to lock up Bitcoin Jesus, but they cannot defeat us. They saw freedom in the code. Now they wanna block his road, but the movement's too damn strong, and this persecution's wrong. Free fear. Free fear. Free fear. Free fear. Down on 9 years for following legal advice. That's not justice, that's a warning. Free Roger Ver.
They've been feeding us these lies since the day that we were born, that we need them to protect us, that we can't survive alone. But baby, that's a fallacy, a chain around my mind. Been blinded by while freedom's been denied. Oh, critical thinking broke these chains, opened up my eyes to see the game. No need for rulers telling me my worth. I'm taking back the power that is mine by birth, yeah. This fallacious belief in their control truth has set me free at last. Government ain't nothing but a cycle, heading toward tyranny. They militarize the police force while preaching about democracy. But fuck that noise, I see the truth now. Their power's built on fear. every system show. Another way is here, yeah, yeah. Critical thinking broke these chains, opened up my eyes to see the game. No need for rulers telling me my worth. I'm taking back the power that is mine by birth, yeah. This fallacious belief in their control has been weighing down my goddamn soul, but I'm free at last, breaking out of their system fast. No, no taxation stealing what's mine, no coercion crossing my line. I'm free at last, the truth has set me free at last. Free at last, this fallacious belief is gone. I'm finally free.
All right, everybody, welcome back to the Aaron Day Show. This is episode 3 of season 2. I know it's been a while. I've been traveling. My wife and I have only been home probably 4 days out of the last month, and I'll give more of a detailed update on what's been going on in a different podcast. But we have a guest tonight, so I don't want to spend too much time on that stuff. So I will jump through a few housekeeping things before we get to the meat of the presentation. There are some more events coming up. I'm going to be speaking at ETH Dam in Amsterdam on somewhere between May the 9th and the 11th. I hope you can attend. I actually hear that is one of the best crypto events in the world. This is what Joel Valenzuela said. So I value his opinion greatly. So I'm very much looking forward to that and hope to see some of you there. And then actually kind of a big announcement on this is related to PorcFest. And so this year, I'm co-sponsoring the largest tent at PorcFest with Mineratopia and Doug Tooman. And the idea behind this is, and if you've been following this podcast or you know me at all, the Free State Project has been a huge vector for early adoption of cryptocurrency. In fact, I think that PorcFest was taking Bitcoin as early as 2012. I learned about crypto from my participation in the Free State Project. I learned about it from Roger Ver. I learned about it from Ian Freeman in 2012. And PorcFest is all about hands-on use. So this is a week-long event at a campground in Lancaster, New Hampshire. And there's this area called Agora Alley. So basically you have an entire week for this conference where people are talking about various aspects of liberty. There are hundreds of talks. There's now a huge, gathering of kids because a lot of Free Staters have had children, all kinds of different activities, but everybody's using alternative currency. And so I thought, given my focus on stopping CBDCs and the, emerging necessity for privacy coins, that, what I would do is partner with Doug at Mineratopia, and we would create an entire tent focused on speakers and activities related to real world adoption of privacy coins. So we're going to have folks there from Xano, Confidential Layer, Cake Wallet is going to be there, and several others. We're just at the very early stages of planning this. My hope when I started this, and it remains my hope, is that we will have possibly Ross Ulbricht, Roger Ver, and Ian Freeman there as free men. And that would certainly be one hell of a celebration. So I actually think this is going to be the best PorcFest by far, hands down. I'm not because of this, but just because of all of the momentum and all of the development within the Free State Project in a variety of different areas, whether it's the political success that's going on at the state level, or agorism that goes on, or the homeschooling community. I mean, the Free State Project has really evolved. And I think that this opportunity to kind of bring back the 2012 energy of crypto to PorcFest is going to add some nice energy to it as well. And as I mentioned, I mean, I met Eric Voorhees at PorcFest. I met Vitalik Buterin at PorcFest before he even created Ethereum. So if you're interested in learning about cryptocurrency, I will tell you, New Hampshire and the Free State Project and PorcFest in particular is where a lot of the real OGs learned about it to begin with. So I'm going to do a dedicated podcast just on this event to walk through it, and also to see if people are interested in participating and speaking and answer any questions people might have. But I will tell you, at its peak, 2 years ago, I believe there were 3,000 people at this event. I think this is now the largest Liberty event in the world. I mean, it's bigger now than Freedom Fest. It's bigger than a lot of other events. And so if you have attended before and maybe you didn't like something one year or whatever, I will tell you, I didn't go for like 5 or 6 years, and night and day difference. So like, I really can't express enough how excited I am about the event. And I encourage you strongly to attend and to buy tickets now, and to try to make your arrangements now, because I suspect it's going to be sold out. Just a quick update on this, kind of related to, crypto and, the workshops and everything. I am currently in the process of developing an online workshop. We're still going to do in-person workshops, but obviously it's very hard, 100, 200 people at a time to onboard people. So we're working on an online program. And part of what I'm waiting for are some exciting developments that are going to make it easier to onboard people to privacy coins and privacy technology. So by the end of this month, Confidential Layer should be live. And if you're not familiar with Confidential Layer allows you to take your transparent blockchains like Bitcoin, Ethereum, and Bitcoin Cash and bridge them without third parties into Xano, so that you can make your Bitcoin Cash, and Ethereum private and scalable. You can use it as essentially a Xano token. I'm not going to go into all the details of how it works, but I certainly will be, and I'll probably be including this in the workshop as well. But this solves a real pain point that people are now only recently becoming aware of, which is related to the transparency and surveillance of these popular transparent blockchains. So this is a huge development. Also, probably by the end of this quarter, I believe, Xano will be integrated into the Bitcoin.com wallet, which I think Bitcoin.com is one of the original wallets. I think there have been something like 50 million downloads since the beginning. I think there are, 1.5 million or so active wallets. So that's going to be huge for adoption. Also, Xano is now integrated into Cake Wallet, which is phenomenal. So I use this. This is my kind of go-to. So I encourage you to check that out. We've been waiting for that for a long time, and I'm grateful to Vic and his team for getting that together, because that makes the experience a lot easier for onboarding and for day-to-day use. I'm not going to go through all of this because there's quite a bit. I've actually pivoted. If you go to daylightfreedom.org and you'll look, we've completely redone the website. And one of the things that I'm focusing on is kind of how Trump pushed and pardoned all of the J6ers at once, all 1,500. We really need this for victims of Biden crypto lawfare, because while Trump rescinded the executive order, he did not rescind the effects and the lawfare created under the executive order. And so there are dozens and dozens of people. Roger, I believe, is the most egregious example of this, but there are certainly others. Ian Freeman, Roman Storm, dozens of companies targeted by the SEC, dozens of companies targeted by the CFTC. And so there's this real disparity now where people are like, oh yeah, I'm really excited about crypto, where the actual OGs upon whose shoulders this entire crypto ecosystem was built are still suffering under this. And so as a point here, Roger has a motion to dismiss hearing. It's been rescheduled. I think I previously stated it was supposed to be February the 3rd or the 5th. I can't remember which date. That's been moved to May the 12th. It's in LA. It's at the United States District Court in California. It's going to be at 1:30 p.m. It's really important to show up for these things. It's important not only to show support for Roger, but to show the government, as everyone did for Ross Ulbricht, that we're not going to just forget about this. We're going to continue to put up pressure and make the public aware of this miscarriage of justice. And so I'm going to be attending, but what I recommend is if you are going to go, buy refundable tickets, because these federal court cases tend to get rescheduled often. This one has already been rescheduled once or twice, and it's very frequent for a whole variety of reasons, whether it's the prosecution or the defense or the court itself, or it's in LA, maybe there are fires. So I do encourage you to get refundable tickets. I'll share more information as we get closer to the date. Also, my intention for this year is to do one podcast a week. I'm already significantly behind, as today is episode 3. So I'm going to be doing 2 a week to get caught up. So in addition to tonight's podcast, I'm doing another podcast on Thursday, which will be at 12:30 in the afternoon. So it's a little bit different, but this will be with Josh Stileman, who I met through the Brownstone Institute, and I've become very good friends with him. He is absolutely on point. He's been writing a number of different articles, not only for Brownstone, but he has his own Substack, and he has really been drilling into technocracy. And his latest article, which will be the primary focus, although we'll talk about some of his other work as well, is this, brilliantly laid out article that kind of gives you the history and kind of the background behind what's going on with technocracy. So that will be Thursday at 12:30. So with that said, I'm going to bring up our guest. And I guess before I do that, if you've been following this podcast, you'll note there are a couple of other episodes that kind of relate to tonight's episode. So I have been very passionate about not only exiting our current political system, but really trying to come up with and look at new models and new governance structures. And I actually gave a talk on this a year ago. I'm like, hey, we should really revisit all this from first principles. The US has been around for 250 years. If you look at either the original intent or the Constitution, clearly the US has gone way off course. And so have we learned anything in 250 years? Would we approach this differently? And I tried to stimulate the group into having a conversation about, how we might start over or re-examine things from first principles. And nobody was interested. I was surprised, because this was the kind of group that would be interested in it. But I've talked to some others. I did an episode on episode 12 from last year, The Digital Cage, that was really about, globalism and technocracy. In that episode, I had Mark Passio and Michael Rechtenwald on, and I thought that was a great episode. And it touched on what's going on and what we're facing with technocracy from both an exoteric perspective and then from an esoteric perspective. So that'll be an interesting one for you to review in light of tonight's episode. And then another one that I really enjoyed, I've spent a lot of time with Sterling Lujan, and saw him in Mexico a few weeks ago, and I'm going to see him a couple more times this year already that I know of. And he's really pioneering research in network states, and he's working on some really innovative solutions. There are these network states propping up all over the world where people are basically developing their own communities of interest and then developing their own governance models kind of from scratch. And so what Sterling is working on is some technologies that enable the creation of network states. And then he's also working on kind of a think tank, if you will, working on best practices to kind of share ideas. And so when you think about it, most governmental structures have been, they've been by force, or it's been kind of a feudal system. The US was really the first to kind of break away with kind of this constitutional form of government, but it hasn't been very scientific. There hasn't been a sharing of best practices or knowledge. And I think Sterling is right at the forefront of examining this and trying to come up with ways to support people who are experimenting with different governance models. And so tonight, our guest is Jeffrey Hann, and he described himself as an anarchist, voluntarist, and principled libertarian. His professional background is as a business analyst. He's a U.S. Army veteran and has had various technical roles. He has just written this book, which you can see on the screen there, The Fallacious Belief in Government. And I highly recommend that you buy this book and read this book. I just finished it recently. In fact, it just came out, I think on March the 1st. But this book really hammers in on a lot of the points that I was just discussing, to really look at kind of what is the true nature of government. And he explains using how he used the Trivium Method to kind of shape his understanding of anarchism and the most ethical framework for community structures, and that true anarchism rejects coercion while respecting natural rights. And that actually dovetails, again, with a lot of these other conversations I've had with Sterling. And if you follow Mark Passio's work, in fact, I saw a lot of overlap in a lot of the things that I've heard Mark talk about. And even actually using the Trivium Method itself, I know is something that Passio is big on. So this book is really well written, and covers a lot of ground. And so again, I recommend you check it out, and I hope that we can help really spread the message here, because I think it's a very good one, and we're grateful to have Jeffrey on to talk about it today. So with that, I'll bring up Jeff. Do you go by Jeffrey or Jeff?
It doesn't matter. I have no opinion on that one.
Okay. All right. Well, anyway, so with that said, I mean, I know I found whatever the bio was that was online, but if you might start out, give a little bit of background on yourself.
Yeah. So this is actually my second book. My first book was COVID-19: Short Path to You'll Own Nothing and You'll Be Happy. Welcome to the New Age of Tyranny. I dove into everything I could find about COVID-19, and that was my first one. I started writing back in 2016, and my first article was on why taxation is theft. And I became an anarchist in 2015 when I learned the Trivium Method of critical thinking through Richard Grove's work. And that kind of blew up my whole understanding on how to actually critically think as like a skill set and a process that I could actually follow and build upon. And that kind of just spawned me to start writing and basically relearning all of the rhetoric I've been taught growing up. And I've just been slowly, methodically going through, like, what is police? What's terrorism? All of these little things. And then COVID happened, and then I got invited out to PorcFest last year, and this topic, the fallacious belief in government, was what I presented on. And so I took that and decided to turn that into a book, which you've now read. So it's been a long journey coming to this point, but it's definitely a message that most are not ready for or not willing to accept, because, what about the roads? And I mean, like, I actually just had a discussion at someone at the DMV yesterday, because I would have to renew my tabs so I don't get pulled over by police. And I was talking with them, and that was their very first thing when I brought it up, was they were like, well, who's going to maintain the roads? And so it's these perpetual logical fallacies that the government has indoctrinated into people, making them believe that we need government and that there's no other solution, that this necessary evil is the only path forward. But if you look at Plato's teachings, thousands of years ago, in his 5 regimes of government, he explains that government is a life cycle and it's not static. So a lot of people like to say, we're a constitutional republic and things like that. Well, we might have started out closer to that, but that's not how the life cycle of government works. It constantly progresses. And after democracy, as Plato explained, it comes tyranny. And after tyranny then you hit revolution, and then it just starts the whole cycle over. Well, that's the idiom of insanity, is doing the same thing over and over and expecting different results. So really, the whole idea of government is a fallacious idea. And we need to understand that as the root cause of all the issues that we face before we can really, truly focus on solutions and to evolve into a better society, or more free and just society. And that's the whole point of this book, is to explain that, from starting with root definitions of government and how it is a tool or action of control over the innocent, and that you can't be free if you're being controlled. And then it moves on through all of the evidence, the contradictions that are inside the Constitution, and then goes into psychological operations that the government and the worldwide intelligence agencies focus on and use to distract people and to manipulate them into compliance and control. And I learned a lot. I got really good in the 90s, getting into computer work and things like that. And I got really good at searching the internet, finding information. Eventually I went into the military and was infantry for the first couple of years. And then I did cyber intelligence with Army Cyber Command. And I did that for a few years. And then I got out and then I got into software development. And I've been kind of doing that since, while also writing on the side. So I've gotten very, very good at finding information, open source information, and becoming a kind of like a subject matter expert of being able to find these details and connect all of these dots and patterns. And that's the whole point of the book, is trying to explain that as a groundwork so that we can get to a freer future, and what I like to call facilitating systems, which is what you brought up with like what Sterling's working on. And like I've had interactions with Sterling, and I actually met him at PorcFest last year, finally, and I've been talking with him for years. And so that type of stuff is what I mean by facilitating systems, is that we need things to help communities function together and work cohesively and to communicate properly, that we can continue moving forward. We just can't have nothing. There has to be something there, or, it needs to be a much smaller, communities. So that's pretty much the whole basis of the book, is getting towards that and then providing a small sample of a potential solution moving forward.
Great. So yeah, and I have a whole bunch of questions for you. So I think I read in the preface that, so this has been kind of a decade-long journey for you. What were your political beliefs before you kind of went through this exercise?
So growing up, I was always middle ground. I never liked Democrats, never liked Republicans. They always had some issues here and there. At one point, I liked a fiscal conservative, social liberal type aspect. Before I understood really what the root definition of liberal is, and how the left aren't liberals, and that their liberal is really being like libertarian, the classical liberals, like they say. So I had that. And then in 2012, when the RNC and the GOP screwed over Ron Paul, that kind of showed me how corrupt even these private organizations are. And then that kind of spawned me into libertarianism, or at least the LP. And then in 2015, I learned the Trivium. I quickly became an anarchist. I started writing. And then I kind of distanced myself from the Libertarian Party because of how they went with names over principles with their nomination that year. And so since then, I've always said the Libertarian Party has been kind of like a dumpster fire. And this past year has been a perfect example that it has not stopped burning. And so that's kind of my path and my views and how I've evolved. And pretty much since I started writing and learning how a lot of definitions I thought were true, and through like public education and stuff like that weren't. And so I'm very big on looking up root definitions and seeing how a word initially started out and has progressed into how it's used today by a lot of people. And there's sophistry, people constantly lying about words or not understanding them, or purposely, misleading people to manipulate and control them. And it's very apparent once you understand the mechanisms behind it, and why root definitions and the themes and context around those words are so important, because it really explains the intent and purpose behind a word. One of my favorite examples is like patriotism, where patriot is a fellow countryman. Well, in a country is a landmass controlled by a government. You don't have a country without a government in place. So a fellow countryman is someone who supports their government. Back in the 18th century, when our founders were fighting for independence, the patriots were redcoats. So in the 18th century, patriotism or patriots also took another connotation, where they were factious disturbers of the government. And that's what some of our founders were. Not all of them. Some of them were definitely there to continue the process of government, and just kind of in a different form. However, the idea of patriotism, as most people tried to, they're flag wavers, they're like, I'm a patriot. Well, yes, you're now a modern day redcoat, the way you're actually using the term. You're not like the founders were. And that's the whole point of the life cycle of government, is that you can't go back. You can't vote your way to freedom. That's not how you slaves can never vote their way to freedom. You only have to move forward. And right now we're entering this new age of tyranny. And it's not just for our country, it's global. this new age of tyranny, and it's a global thing. So we have to actually progress through that until we can get to a true revolution. And the problem is that the powers that be know this process, and so they're going to televise, and I say revolutions, and it's all going to be like controlled oppositions or co-opted movements. So people follow along thinking they're going to be saved or that they're doing something, but it's really going to be a net negative to what they're trying to seek out. Case in point is what's going on with Trump and Musk, and everyone says, oh yeah, they're cutting, government and they're doing all this stuff. And I'm like, but when you really look at it, they're not really. And when they are cutting it, it's only certain things. And then they're implementing AI on the back end, which is all part of Agenda 2030. So people thinking that they're getting what they want, but they're not. They're actually getting a replacement, and it's going to be pretty awful when we fully get into it. And so that's the whole point of the book.
Yeah, I think that's definitely a concern. I've been pointing this out as well. When I wrote my book, I dropped everything that I was doing 2.5 years ago to warn people about CBDCs and Biden's actions to crack down on crypto. And when I did that, and a big part of my research and part of my book was the technocracy movement and kind of understanding the basis for UN Agenda 2030. I wanted to understand, where did this come from? What's the ideological basis for it? And that's when I really learned about technocracy, this idea that elites pick scientists and engineers to make decisions for us, that we're not, humanity will blow itself up unless we apply technology to the human condition. And the only efficient way to do that is to have elites pick the best scientists and engineers. And a big part of this is we flip the economy from a price-based system to an energy credit-based system. And so this is really the basis for the Trilateral Commission and a lot of the other groups which actually developed the early framework for what is now UN Agenda 2030. So everybody was complaining about Klaus Schwab. Everybody was complaining about Yuval Harari. And what we don't realize is that, and this is, by the way, I would say the same with Biden versus Trump. Biden wanted a CBDC, but he was good at the lawfare at going after crypto, but he wasn't good at executing on a CBDC. Now we have Trump and Musk, and what they've done is they basically rebranded. They've said, well, we're not going to do a CBDC, but instead they're pushing for commercial bank issued stable coins that are regulated by the Federal Reserve, which for all practical purposes from a surveillance perspective is the same as a CBDC. The only difference is this new administration is competent enough to pull this off. So I would argue in many ways that we might get Agenda 2028 because there's actually a big power up now that we have these Silicon Valley people, and Musk comes from a family deeply embedded in the technocracy movement. And so this is it. And I will say from my perspective, and I hope your book opens people's eyes and minds, but a year ago, people were worried about CBDCs. Now my work has become 1,000 times more difficult because people are fundamentally complacent. And instead of looking at, and I actually want to get into this in a minute, people are not using the Trivium Method. People are not looking at first principles. People are not analyzing things logically. They're looking for white knights, and they're basically just playing follow the leader.
Yep.
Which is very dangerous. But I like the way that you laid out the Trivium Method. But for people that aren't familiar with it, because I know a lot of people aren't, and certainly it's not part of our public education system, which you point out in the book. But could you give a real simple kind of basic explanation of what the Trivium Method is?
Absolutely. Yeah. So the Trivium Method is basically, there's 3 pillars. You have grammar, logic, and rhetoric. Grammar is your input. It's where you collectively build your systematic body of knowledge, your unstructured, semi-structured, and structured data, subjective data, objective data, your facts, everything that you can gather and detail out, and root definitions, context, what really things mean. That's all the grammar stage. It's not just how you write a sentence, but it's really the overarching foundation for anything that you put out as rhetoric. Now, the logic phase is the processing, where you take all that data and you start looking at it in the lens of what's a logical fallacy, what are inherent contradictions, and you have to look at yourself. And that's one of the hardest things for people to do, is that they don't want to be wrong. So you have to really, truly look at yourself and say, hey, am I thinking about this incorrectly? Could I be wrong here? and you start identifying like biases, the different fallacies that you might be using, the inherent contradictions, all of those things, and then you start applying it to then the outside influences, politicians, the people around you as they're talking, and you start applying that information or that processing to all of that. Then from that, after you've processed all of that data, you then apply it to rhetoric, which is your output. And that's just, it should be a truthful, based on like your ethical morality and factual data. And it should be in some form of action. Like you should be able to take action on it. And so all of my work has been around the Trivium, and I talk about it in every single article I've published. My first book, I have a chapter on it. It is a very big and important thing that I apply and I try to teach people. And it's a very, very simple process. So anytime you get new information that contradicts anything that you hold true, you immediately have to go back to the grammar stage and you start the whole process over with that new information to see if it changes anything. So if someone presents and say, hey, this definition to this word that you're using is incorrect, it's actually this. Well, if you're unsure, you really go look up the root definition, you confirm it, you agree in sentiment to the person that you're speaking with that, yes, I agree that this definition needs to be changed. Now, does that definition, the new definition, change your entire rhetoric? Does it change the logic? And does it change your rhetoric that you're speaking and then your actions? And so it's a never-ending process that you have to use, and you have to be aware of the process. You can't just innately have the ability to analyze things or to think critically, because a lot of people think that they can think critically, but they are unaware of the actual process to use, or a structured process, which is what the Trivium provides. And it's a very like grammar, logic, rhetoric, and you just in that order. And the more you use it, the better you get at being able to do it. And again, it's the metacognition aspect of it. It's being aware of the process and thinking while you're moving through it, which is the key to making it a successful skill set.
So are there some references that you would recommend, or other resources for people if they want to dig into the Trivium?
I have some information on my site. Like I said, all of my books and all of my work, I cover it. Topics, Richard Grove, I know, has a lot of stuff in his work and on his sites. And I mean, it's like I said, it's just a more of, you got to just kind of dive into it and learn, and then just start using it to build it, because it's a skill set. You might have an innate ability, but you really have to apply yourself to it and work at it to grow it and to get better at it.
I mean, I will say I played around with logical fallacies and AI. In fact, there's this image that has like, I don't even know how many, 20 different logical fallacies on it. And it's really kind of interesting to play around with that as a tool. So I think I recommend people dig into this, because it will change the way that you think about things, and think in the way you think about thinking itself, which is something that once you realize that this is available to us, and then you realize what your educational process has been like, you might get a bit frustrated with that. But I know Richard Grove, one of the things that he did that interview or series of interviews with John Taylor Gatto, and it was just, phenomenal in terms of if you want to learn about the public education system. That's another great resource. And then one of my all-time favorite books is the NEA Trojan Horse in American Education, which is a phenomenal book that talks about the Prussian system, but then also the whole origin. A lot of people think that we were an illiterate nation, and that public school was put in to solve a literacy problem, and in fact, it couldn't be further from the truth. This was very much organized and implemented for social.
It is to create literacy slaves who have blind obedience towards authority, people who can work and can do a job but can't think for themselves. And it really comes down to the two different systems. You're the classical Trivium, which was more from like the Catholic Church, and that was all about creating the literacy slaves, keeping your approved knowledge, just like government approved knowledge and rhetoric. And they keep a little, circle body of knowledge, keep people in it. You can't go outside of it. You try to think beyond what they're providing you. You get your hands slapped, those type of things. You see it also in academic and college level material. And so that's just the classical Trivium. And the Prussian education system was developed when the Prussians lost against Napoleon. And they decided that the reason that happened was because their soldiers were thinking for themselves. So they came up with a whole indoctrination for students to basically create blind obedience towards authority with a focus on nation building. And of course, the Prussians then later turned into Germany and then Nazi Germany. So you can see the patterns of history, kind of where we're going, that we have that Trump, and I know a lot of people don't like to say it, but like Trump and Hitler and the time frames and how things have been moving are very similar in pattern and the progression of stuff as we move towards this new age of tyranny. And it really comes down to this indoctrination that has been the US education system for decades, and we've had generations upon generations of people that have been indoctrinated into this system and been taught. And so trying to get beyond that is actually quite difficult. Trying to get through to people who have been indoctrinated and who believe so much in this, and they a lot of times they're like, oh, the next 4 years we just got to vote them out. We just got to vote them out. Well, I always like to say vote harder, slaves, because again, you can't vote your way out of this. That's not how the life cycle of government works.
Yeah. And I was going to ask you this. I know you touched on it briefly, but could you, again, for folks that may not be familiar with it, kind of walk through Plato's model of 5 regimes? Because I think that's a good gap.
Yeah. So his 5 regimes. Let me get to the actual full list of that. So his 5 regimes: aristocracy, just like where the ideal form of government, ruled by philosopher kings, people who are more about the people and things like that. But the problem is that when that person dies and the next person comes up, whether it's a family member, their children, or some other elected person, those people are not going to be the same. And so it eventually then devolves in democracy, which you have more pursuing honor and military achievement, which then you then kind of move into from that, because again, they're obsessive with like status. Competition leads to materialism, which weakens it, allowing more wealth to be the dominant factor in the government, which then leads to oligarchy, which is kind of what you're seeing today. All the billionaires that Trump has now put into position of power, and that's like the rule of the wealthy. And then from there, Plato explained that you then move into democracy, which they like to say, Aristotle, Plato, they always said democracy was the greatest form of freedom because it brings the most people together. However, the caveat to that is the greater the freedom, the greater the tyranny that follows. And it's because people vote, and it's that progressive aspect where you just you think you're voting for freedom. And I think that's the fallacy aspect of it, is that democracy is really a sheep's in clothing. It's the majority makes slaves out of the minority. However, in most systems, it's the majority really isn't voting, because it requires an informed populace to really stay on top of these things, and the populace is not informed, has never been informed. Thousands of years, we're still combating that. The information and the people that usually are in charge try to maintain all of that information and only provide some information, because again, it makes people easier to control. So then democracy then devolves into tyranny. Well, the US actually started out, people like to say, a constitutional republic, because it pulled from several aspects of these regimes that Plato explained. And I would say in the 80s and leading into the 90s and early 2000s was more our democracy phase, where things started to progress a little bit faster. And now we're entering this new age of tyranny. And COVID, in my book, I describe it as a live fire exercise for what is coming. And it was the beginning stages of this new age of tyranny, of them setting everything, in place, getting things situated, seeing how people react to this government tyranny that they push. And so now they've basically have tested the system out. They see how people are going to respond when they enforce, mandates, mass mandates, vaccinations, things like that. And most people are going to accept it. And if you look at COVID had like a 0.02% mortality rate when you actually look at the full scope of how many people were infected versus how many died. Well, the reason I call it a live fire exercise is because they knew it wasn't going to be bad and that it was minor and that they blamed a lot of things on it. And even though they blamed a lot of things on it, it still had a very small mortality rate. While I discovered evidence, and it seems like there is going to be a bird flu pandemic coming as well, and that one seems to be will be a much higher mortality rate. So if you think about it, everyone feared, like in 2019 they started pushing the rhetoric of measles being, going around, all the children are going to die and things like that. And then from that measles fear, they ramped everyone up, came COVID-19. And then everyone was like, willing to sacrifice their freedoms and their neighbors' freedoms and their rights for this semblance, an idea of potential safety. Well, now you start seeing these measles scares starting to ramp up again in the rhetoric and the news, or in the news and all over a bunch of different states, Washington, Texas, Ohio. There's several other ones that they're now pushing. And what people don't realize is that the bird flu mRNA vaccination trials, human trials, started in December, and they're backed by the Gates Foundation. And in my first book, in the COVID-19 book, I linked and correlated all of the COVID-19 human trials to all the mutations that were going on. Every city or location that had one of those human trials, a new variant came from that. So the idea that these mRNA vaccinations spread the spike proteins and shed, and there's ample evidence to suggest that these happen, then the logic dictates that bird flu is going to do the exact same thing. And one of the ex-CIA directors actually had publicly stated that the real pandemic was going to be a bird flu pandemic. So if this logic, if that is true, that these mRNA vaccinations are really going to be driving that, then that means that that's what's coming. And in my book, which was published in 2023, I said that we would have a bird flu pandemic in 2025. And of course, now in this past December, they started the human trials. You're starting to see the rhetoric start to ramp up, and now they're pushing the measles again, just like they did in 2019. So it's the same pattern, and it's very similar to 2019 leading into 2020. And so it'll be interesting to see how the rest of this year plays out. And I'm still on the idea that we are going to see a bird flu pandemic, and it's going to get bad. And a lot of people are going to roll over. And now, of course, you have RFK Jr., who has been for years kind of saying that he's anti-vax, but then at the same time telling people that he was pro-vax. And now he's even more so saying, no, you need to get the measles vaccination to protect yourself from these measles outbreak. And it's just showing that controlled opposition is everywhere, and you can't trust any of these people. There's no saviors. There is no billionaire saviors. There's no one in government who will protect you and put their life on the line. I mean, because he might have had that position, but the second he gets somewhere, they could have shown him evidence of his uncle and his father being taken out by like CIA or Mossad, and he's going to be like, okay, well, I guess I'm just going to roll with it. And so there's those possibilities, but it's actions over words. He says all the nice things, but now that he's in place, he's now doing the wrong thing. And it's the same thing with Trump. Trump was claiming, anti-vax and all this stuff, and then he did Operation Warp Speed and gave us the mRNA vaccines. And everyone on the right who now follows him, they're like, oh no, it was Biden's vaccination. And I'm like, no, it wasn't. It was Trump's. Biden just made it mandatory or he said it was going to make it mandatory. And then he didn't do any more pushing because he knew he couldn't. Legally, he couldn't. And so all of that stuff but everyone blamed Biden when really it was Trump. And so now I think Biden was really just a setup to convince people that Trump was really fighting for them and leading them into, now we had the next 4 years with him, and he's going to bring in Agenda 2030, all of this transhumanism, these new mRNA vaccinations. I mean, because he could stop the mRNA vaccination trials if he wanted. He could make it public. RFK Jr. could do the same thing, but they haven't. Everyone's saying, oh, he's killing, the COVID-19 mRNA vaccination. He just said that no one's allowed to, no schools are allowed to make it mandatory. But there was no K through 12 schools in the nation doing it. And there was only 15 colleges that actually had a COVID-19 vaccination mandatory requirement still. And some of them were private colleges. So it's really is, what did he really do and stop? And then, everyone likes to say RFK Jr. is going to go after the COVID-19 stuff, but no one's getting it anymore. Everyone's moved on. Everyone's no longer concerned with COVID-19. Well, I mean, maybe a few small select people that are still like wearing masks and stuff, but for the most part, people aren't. And so it's just it's a fallacious idea thinking these people are really here to help us and protect us, when the actions, the real stuff that's going to be a danger is coming up in the back end and people don't see it.
Yep. Yeah. One of the things is because I know a lot of people that are close to Maha, and I actually asked somebody, I'm like, well, why would RFK come out for this measles vaccine when he's previously said, and a lot of other people, and my wife actually has been involved in health freedom. Like, she's an OG. She was pushing vaccine choice legislation in 2005, 2006. And so, it's been known that measles is related to autism and a whole variety of different things for a long time. And RFK has even said that. So, so I'm kind of like, why did RFK do this? And part of it is they claim that Dr. Jay Bhattacharya is still going through the confirmation process for NIH. So there's one theory that he's doing it for that. I hope that's the case, because otherwise, I mean, he came out against anti-Semitism. He put out a public health statement about being against anti-Semitism, which has nothing to do with any of what's on the table. And so, I mean, it certainly seems like what his actions are, that he's completely lost the plot. And I think a lot of people were thinking, oh, well, it's 5D chess. We have to say these things in order to get confirmed. And it's turning out that these people are confirmed and now they're actually doing the other thing. So it looks like it might have been a rug pull, which we're probably not surprised, but a lot of other people are. And
they're going to hold on to that. Oh, no, it's just the 5D chess, the 42D chess, whatever they want to call it. It's not it's not going to end well, because that's not how government works. And like I said, the whole thing's been a setup. Since 2016, I have said Trump has been a trap. And since he decided to start running, I've been like, no, he's a trap. Look at his background. He is super pro-Israel. He has ties. His dad has ties, all of those things. And it just screamed trap to me. And nothing he's done has swayed me from that opinion. So the fact that he's now won and moved forward, it just makes it even more so. And like, I look back at like his ear when he got shot, or supposedly got shot. I don't think he was shot. I think it was all set up. It was all staged. The Secret Service, on how they handled the whole thing, all of it was wrong. And everyone says, oh, deep state is so powerful, they can do all of this stuff. And you're telling me that this almighty deep state couldn't take him out with how screwed up that whole situation was? Like, it just screams setup. And then, of course, they put Linda McMahon as now in charge of it. And I immediately, when it happened, I was like, that was a WWE production of the whole thing. And I was immediately calling out. And again, people are like, oh, no, how are you saying people didn't get shot? And I'm like, no, they probably shot people in the audience. They probably did some things, but it wasn't the shooter on the roof, wasn't the real shooter. He was just the patsy that they killed. The real one was underneath it in undercover. And so the whole thing was just a production that allowed Trump to win the presidency and people to back him, thinking that this deep state was trying to go after him. And a case in point was actually like QAnon, and how that whole thing through his first term and then into Biden, how all of that played out, and all of that screamed a whole entire psyops program pushed by an intelligence agencies. And again, but people don't see that, and it's because they're unaware and they can't critically think beyond a few days at a time with the information that they're being fed by either politicians or mainstream media.
So do you think, based on Plato's, five different models, do you think we're at the oligarchy stage, or how close are we to tyranny?
I think we've entered the tyranny, and because again, it's like on a sliding scale. So I do believe COVID-19 was the very beginning of tyranny. And I mean, you could say that, tyranny started with 9/11 and the Patriot Act and things like that. And I think those those were all the gray area in between moving from really a democracy aspect to a tyranny. And we're just now getting into it. And we have 15, 20 years to really get into the full-blown tyranny. And again, it's worldwide. And remember that the World Economic Forum in 2018 said that we would own nothing and we would be happy by 2030. Well, now we're 5 years from that. What changes have to happen for us to own nothing and be happy about it? What kind of economic horror is coming upon us? And they love doing self-fulfilling prophecies. They have the manpower, they have the resources, and they've been planning this stuff since at least the 80s or longer. And it's just, it just takes time for what they're looking at. And I have theories on the whole end goal and really what it is, but I didn't really discuss that in my second book. I do cover it in my first book. But it's definitely I do believe we're in that tyranny phase, and it's only going to get worse. And again, with the CBDCs and identity tracking with real ID, stuff like that, all of that is going to start playing into it and start to ramp up. And if we do get hit with this bird flu pandemic, that you're going to see a whole nother round of massive tyranny as millions of people start to die off, because that's probably what's going to happen during a real bird flu pandemic. And I say real because I don't necessarily say it's going to be a virus or anything like that. I think whatever bioweapon that they've created and that they'll be releasing, because they've been testing it out in Ukraine. And there's evidence showing that they've already developed this hibernized bird flu that can spread and infect people. And then now you have all the COVID vaccines that were most likely bioweapons that have now weakened people, and there's more and more people getting more cancers and potentially like AIDS, things like that, and their whole immune system is getting shot and having all of these problems. And it's all going to be then blamed on like a bird flu, and who knows how that'll actually start, whether a terrorist attack or just a human to or an animal to human jump like they blamed on the bats, which became was not true. And I remember in 2019 in December when it first happened, I was immediately on it because the rhetoric in the news was different. It was different than previous stuff. They focused on it a little too much, and they kept saying it was from a bat, even though they had the level 4 bio lab that was only 20 miles away from that open air market that they said it actually came from. And it just, I mean, I've had accounts closed and and censored over the years just by saying, hey, it came from this lab, whether it was a leak or purposely released. I mean, I guess it's a moot point at that, really how it got out, but it did. And the government tried really hard to silence all of that. And there's ample evidence showing that Fauci knew it came from there and then lied to the American public just to push the vaccines that they developed within a year, thanks to Trump. And so it just shows this coordinated effort across Democrats and Republicans. It doesn't matter because it's the same side of it's the two different sides of the same coin. There is no deep state. It's just the government. There's not some, secretive deep state trying to overthrow the deep state. It's just government, and everyone's being played.
Yep. Yeah, well, I mean, related to that, on the rhetoric side, related to this, and of course, we have this Operation Stargate. So we have Larry Ellison now. We have $500 billion being invested in a huge press conference talking about how we're going to be able to do targeted mRNA technology, which is so that's being put out there. And I mean, of course, you're right. Trump has not backed down. He considers Operation Warp Speed to be the crowning achievement of his first term. He was unwilling to, in any way, shape, or form, back down from that, and he hasn't. So far, it's looking pretty good for the vaccine, folks. But I actually just saw something yesterday. I mean, on the rhetoric front, in the Congo, there was some story about 3 kids eating a bat, and now there's some new mystery disease,
new coronavirus, or they saw. I know it was like 100 people died or something, and that it was some mystery illness. They're unsure about it, and I don't know if it's true that there is something that they released or if it's just rhetoric to try to drum up fear. I mean, it could be a combination of things. I just know that we are definitely moving towards a potential bird flu pandemic, and if the ex-CIA director is correct, and if the mRNA human trials are really causing it or will help drive it, then that's definitely what we're going to be seeing. And everything before that is just to help amp up the fear, because that's one way for psychological operations is fear-based. You make someone fear, then they're irrational. They can't think through things. They can't see, the forest through the trees, and they're stuck in the perpetual fear, willing to do whatever they can to not fear that fear. And so really, to just keep that fear going, you just keep giving more and more, oh, unknown this, oh, unknown that. Your only solution is more government.
Yep.
Or AI backed solutions. And these billionaire saviors are the ones that are going to help solve everything.
Yep.
And it's just, there's no Batman. Batman doesn't, it's a fictitious thing. But people want to believe it. And it sucks, because it definitely hinders anything that we try to do, because most people still think, oh, if I just vote them out, next election, that'll be it. I don't have to do anything beyond that. I don't have to fight for it. And revolutions are not peaceful. Insurrections are not peaceful. They are violent and they are bloody, because that's what tyranny has no problem killing people and using violence and force to maintain their control. And so unless you're willing to meet that, there's no way to really get beyond the tyranny. That is what you're going to end up fighting for, to get to a true revolution. But I don't think we're even close to getting to a real revolution. I think we're definitely at a minimum a decade, 2 decades away from a potential something like that.
Yeah, I mean, that again, I'm more for the exit and build, remove your energy from the negative thing, but although there are a lot of questions, even with network states and all this stuff, about practically how you do it, and we can talk about that in a bit. I wanted to ask, one of the things you said in the book is being born does not imply consent to be governed, and I think this is an important point. But do you want to elaborate on that, because this really is people don't talk about something people don't think about. People never really question the whole basis. Yeah.
And it all comes down, again, consent. I mean, children can't consent. So you have to have, there's a difference between, like, really what is authority. And I've only found the true authority is your parental or guardianship authority. People who take care of others who can't take care of themselves. Once you're an adult, no one should have authority over you except you. You should have authority over yourself, and that's it. And so you just being born in some spot doesn't mean I've consented to be ruled by whoever gets elected or seizes power or anything like that. And that's the whole point of that statement. And the idea is that you're not born, because it's like being born into slavery. And slavery, everyone likes to say, is immoral, but when you look around, you see it everywhere, and it's still in practice. I mean, even the Constitution legalized slavery, and a lot of people don't like to think about that. However, when you read the 13th Amendment, there's an exception to it. They say that, the 13th Amendment abolished slavery, except when you've been duly convicted of a crime. Well, who defines what a crime is? Government. Jaywalking. Oh, that's a crime in some places. And so if you've been duly convicted of jaywalking, guess what? You can be sent to jail, prison, and be forced to work for minimal pay or nothing. And what's the difference between being that and 100% of everything taken from you is pure slavery? At what point is it not? And I think at any point. So if anyone takes anything from you without your permission, without your consent, it's a form of robbery, slavery, which is why I like to say, taxation is theft and things like that, and which I cover in my book.
Yeah, I was going to actually move to that kind of the institutions and control section, which, I actually had a good meme which shows the Bill of Rights and how, what has replaced all of the Bill of Rights. Because I look at this as the Constitution hasn't really been an operating document since 9/11, maybe even before that. Mm-hmm. And I mean, it's just been shredded along the way. And I actually wrote something today, because a part of what I spend my time doing now, which it wasn't supposed to be this way, I wrote my book trying to warn people about Biden's crackdown. And now, you know, I go around with wearing, you know, t-shirts. I got a t-shirt right now with Roger Ver on it. I had Free Ross t-shirts. I'm getting some, you know, eat. And so, you know, now all of a sudden friends and people that I know are actually in prison or facing prison, which is really sad the more I have dug into this. But to make a point for people that have never engaged in, and you talk about a couple of these things, I'm just going to mention a few of my own experiences. I actually spent 5.5 years in a lawsuit for conspiracy to commit defamation. And I'm not going to go through the whole story, but I was involved in politics. It's a really long story, but I was running for U.S. Senate, and I had recruited a slate of independent candidates. The whole purpose of it wasn't to win. It was to actually tilt the election. It was to cost the Republicans all of the federal seats and the gubernatorial seat, because our U.S. senator had interfered with our state level politics. It interfered with the speaker's race to push Obamacare Medicaid expansion. And the reason that she did it was to increase the likelihood of her being reelected to the U.S. Senate. So I'm sitting here looking at this. I'm like, okay, if you're going to do that for your own DC, if you're going to interfere with the state for your political career, then, you know, I'm not going to primary you, but these are razor thin margins. So I'll just, you know, recruit a slate of candidates and we'll take you out. Well, it was very successful. I took out a sitting senator. We took out 2 of the congressional seats, but the guy that I recruited to run for governor was, to say the least, a bit of a colorful character and a loose cannon. Well, I was his campaign manager in a way, in that, because in order to get on the ballot, I had to get signatures collected. So that was a pretty Herculean task. But this guy went and started calling people drug dealers and money launderers and everything else on electronic billboards, because he's a mortgage broker. So he had these huge electronic signs in the busiest, highest traffic areas in New Hampshire. So he starts calling these people drug dealers, attempted murder, all this other stuff. And so it ends up being like a $280 million lawsuit. And I'm being sued for conspiracy to commit defamation. In fact, there are 2 separate lawsuits. The second lawsuit that lasted longer than the other, I have never spoken to the guy that was suing me. And my co-defendant had already lost the lawsuit. The cases had been separated. So I was being sued for conspiracy, even though the co-defendant wasn't there. And my point in even bringing this up, 8 judges recused themselves. It was dismissed. Then it went to the Supreme Court. It was sent, state Supreme Court. It was sent back. And I ended up settling the case. But 5.5 years of my life, and what people don't realize is they use things like conspiracy all the time. Ian Freeman is in prison for 8 years for selling Bitcoin without a license. And it's a series of, he's being charged with a whole bunch of different concurrent sentences. So the longest concurrent part of the concurrent sentence, it's the 8 years, is conspiracy to commit money laundering. Well, he was actually convicted of money laundering, but the judge had to throw it out. He actually threw out the jury conviction because there was literally no evidence of money laundering. But yet he's still in there for conspiracy to commit money laundering. And so what people don't realize is they can use interstate commerce, they can use conspiracy to do whatever they want. And the Constitution is not there to protect our rights. The Constitution is there to protect criminals, and it's there to protect the government. And people don't have any concept of that. And unless you've interacted with the court system, you won't know that. But you talked about, and I wanted to touch on a couple of just 2 areas, really. You talked about a chapter on policing challenges and how protected serve is completely antithetical to what actually goes on with the police. And so do you want to talk about that a bit?
Yeah. So the whole chapter is, protect and serve reality. And the idea of, police around the nation have said, we're here to protect and serve you. And through my research and trying to figure out what police is, using the root definition of police enforcement, it's really more of policy enforcers. They are here to enforce the policies dictated to them, even a tyrant's will. And but legally speaking, there are several major cases that set precedent showing that police don't actually have a duty to protect and serve the individual. They have a duty to protect and serve society as a whole, government as a whole. And so these cases just show that legally the police, these policy enforcers, do not protect and serve. They are here to maintain the status quo of the government, and that's why they're given qualified immunity, and why people in government rarely actually face prosecution for the crimes that they are really committing. And they have no problem going after like someone like you who we might just be a part of some group, and as long as they can use the law against you, they will. But it's hard to use the law against them because, again, they're government, and they go, oh, well, I don't have to pay. It just comes out of taxpayers' budget because I have qualified immunity. I made a mistake. Oh, no. And because of that, and again, it just shows that it really does protect the status quo. And like you were saying, that the Constitution really protects those people, because the idea of the Constitution was to put limits on the government. However, they violate it all the time. So it shows that that piece of paper really doesn't protect them. And when someone can finally, after years and years and years of lawsuits, finally, take it to the Supreme Court, they might get restitution, but the people who actually did the violations rarely see justice served against them. And it just shows that police aren't here to protect. They're not peacekeepers. They're modern day redcoats. They're here to enforce tyranny based on whatever arbitrary, thing is written on other paper. The law is a poor litmus test to what's ethically and morally correct in society. It is not a thing that we should. A lot of people say, well, but it was the law. Well, I mean, slavery at one point was fully legal in a lot of places, and now it's constitutionally protected, based on a very simple exception that they've added into it. But in my book, I actually call out the different cases, from 1968, 1981, 1989, 2005. There's several cases that over the years have provided this precedence that government really has no duty to protect and serve, except criminals who are officially under their care. Those are the only ones that they have a duty to protect and serve as an individual. Otherwise, they can just sit there and watch you die, get robbed, murdered, and they don't have to lift a finger because they actually don't have that constitutional duty to do it. And then it becomes more of a morality aspect for the individual in that uniform if they want to protect you or not.
Yeah. Mark Passio has. Are you familiar with Mark?
I don't think so.
He's an interesting guy. You should take a look at him. He's been kind of fighting this really interesting background. The guy actually was part of the satanic cult with LaVey, and he left the cult, and so he spent 17 years trying to kind of push natural law and morality, and to teach people about natural law and about the occult and kind of what's going on the esoteric side. But he has a number of videos where he talks about law enforcement and, basically outsourcing your morality for a paycheck. And it's some very interesting and colorful thoughts on that. But you had mentioned in the book that how much police militarization has changed things. And I will say my experience with this, I mean, I'm in New Hampshire, all of the time, and it's part of the Free State Project. And I remember in 2013 going with Carla Garrick, who was the president of the Free State Project, who's now the chair, and there was a hearing to discuss whether or not I can't even remember maybe we were in Concord. I don't even remember which town we were in, but whether or not they should get basically a Bearcat. And so we had a big presence and everything, and a lot of people speaking. And of course, we lost, and they ended up with a Bearcat. And when Ian Freeman was arrested a couple of years ago, they actually sent 5 departments of the federal government to his house, and they broke into his house with a Bearcat. So that was kind of the irony of that. I mean, we're trying to fight this police militarization, and then in the end, one of our own ends up having his door busted down by a Bearcat. But what are your thoughts on how police militarization has really further changed the dynamic between citizens and law enforcement?
I think that the militarization of police is the standing army that some of the founders tried to warn future societies or generations against. And then you have the idea that, the drug law, that Biden basically was the drug czar, and how he started it in the 70s and kind of really pushed for all of the crime bill and things like that. And then now you have Trump saying that drug dealers need to be put to death. And so he's pro-police, just like Biden was, and will be pushing it, and it's just going to get worse. And they have no problem. And like I said, I always say that, you know, there's no law too small that the government won't kill over. And they have no problem. They view anyone as a potential threat, and so they've ramped up this fear of terrorism, and that these people are, you know, going to have violent raping gangs all over. So we need the police to be basically like a standing army to help protect society. I mean, like but that's not, we're not in a war zone yet. And I mean, if we were in a war zone, then maybe I could see why it would be a benefit. But for just patrolling neighborhoods and things like that, you don't need it. And I think it adds the reason why. One, it was to strengthen the monopoly on violence that the government has. And I also think it was also to basically, like the broken window fallacy, where the government creates a problem and then offers solutions. So the government militarizes police over decades and convinces all of these police organizations all over the nation to that every single person is a potential violent criminal, that they have to assume is a potential violent criminal, which then sets society on edge, causing conflicts. And then during like protests and other stuff, they have police agitators, FBI informants, things like that, helping to agitate these situations that then call on the militarized police to then basically fight back using these weapons. And that then creates a dissatisfied distrust against some people, and which is why they started pushing for like defunding the police. But the problem with defunding the police aspect of it is that they only defunded certain aspects that made things worse, and it was just a setup so that now that Trump's back in, all of this money is going to start going back to them. They're going to have all of this equipment, and now you have anyone who wants to step out of line. I mean, now Trump is saying that anyone who is protesting Israel's attack on Gaza is, you know, basically a terrorist. And in what, 2019, the FBI officially said anyone who was a conspiracy theorist is a domestic terrorist. So if you don't believe official government rhetoric, you are a domestic terrorist to the government. And so now the militarized police from the local level to the federal level could be used against you just because you don't believe what the government is saying is true. And that's the whole system is built upon it. It's all corrupt. And it's basically the reason why is because the very nature of government itself and the idea of government is tyrannical. And because it always leads to tyranny, it is a violation of natural rights to be controlled when you have not created a victim and you're not a criminal. And so that's I have a very, like, I don't necessarily think it's all individuals who are police, because I have met some people who they seemed great, they seemed good, but it's very few and far between. And it's the job itself, which is the problem, not necessarily the person, but it's always the person when they're at the job. They can't be trusted. When they are wearing a gun and that badge, they have authority over you, and they can act at any erratic behavior they want, and they have more qualified immunity, and you have to be on point. They don't need to know all the laws to enforce the stuff, but you need to know all the laws to make sure that you don't get your rights violated in that moment. And so it's the duality of the aspect is you know, one-sided, that favors the government, and then basically like the house always wins. So that's my stance, is that the current system and how the government uses the militarization of police is a way that drives us towards this new age of tyranny, and it just continues to build upon it. There's no going back. You can't go back. You have to just keep going forward until the system collapses. And with we're at 37 trillion now. I mean, it already jumped up $1 trillion from December. And so this whole entire system is going to collapse, but that's why they're bringing in AI, and you have the CBDCs as a replacement. And I have actually brought up going on along that and dealing with the collapse. Do you remember the Amero when they were trying to push that back in the early 2000s? And so when Trump was kind of talking about, you know, purchasing Canada and Mexico, my mind immediately went to Amero, and that the new CBDC would be something along those lines, where he's going to try to get these 2 locations. And then now we have this more of the Amero aspect, and it is more towards this one world government aspect. And it's just slowly building and building. And it's a lot of people just don't see these patterns and the rhetoric and how it's forcing us, and that the tool of that oppression is going to be the police, because they're the ones that are going to be kicking down the door. They're the ones that are going to be putting you in handcuffs, not the politicians, not the president. I'm not scared of any politician or president, but I am scared about 20, 30 guys with ARs coming in my door and putting me in handcuffs or putting bullets into me. Because, like, that's a very real possibility, just based on where I stand and how I view things. Even though I'm not a violent criminal, I don't do that. However, just the idea of freedom and natural rights can put you in the ground, can get you arrested based on some arbitrary thing that some corrupt politician decides.
Yeah, I mean, it's frightening when you look at, I don't know what Musk said, but within the next few years, there are going to be 1 billion robots produced, and that you have all of these competing companies. And every time I see something new from Boston Dynamics, it's terrifying, because whether it's a robot dog with a flamethrower or whatever it happens to be, I mean, they're going to be able to truly enforce this tyranny without even having to spend a lot of money actually hiring people, which is devastating.
Like 5-6 years ago, I want to say, that shooter in Dallas, a veteran, it was like some supply or cook or something like that, who went on a shooting spree and killed a couple of cops. And they strapped C4 to a robot and blew up a wall that killed him. And so it just shows that they are progressing for that. And now you have drones. You just strap a small little explosive charge. You see it happening in Ukraine, where Russia and Ukraine are strapping explosives to drones, flying them into soldiers. That's going to happen here. I mean, you see all the drones flying around a few months back on the East Coast, and it's not a hard or large leap to see that the government has no problem strapping explosives to that and targeting people and just taking them out.
Yep.
Definitely the direction we're going.
That is, yeah, no, I mean, that is next level police militarization, and it's here, and it's going to ramp up. And, you know, and again, I think when you look at a couple of points to this, I mean, you talked about the fact that Linda McMahon is now in charge of the Department of Education and her ties to WWF, but then we have Peter Thiel, who bankrolled Hulk Hogan's lawsuit against Gawker. So Peter Thiel was upset that he was outed as gay by Gawker, and so Gawker had released a sex tape with Hulk Hogan in it, and Thiel bankrolled that lawsuit and bankrupted Gawker. And so now you see all of the overlap here, but not only that, kind of the theater aspect of it. You now have a new alliance of AI companies that includes Palantir and a handful of other AI companies and robotics companies that are working together to bid on defense and military contracts. And so they are going to hyper accelerate the AI surveillance and all of this stuff. I mean, that's not even a theoretical concept. That is actively being pursued right now, and it should be horrifying to people, because again, in a way, it's worse than Klaus Schwab was just an academic talking about doing something. These are the people who can actually do things, and people are cheering it on without understanding what the implications of it are. And that's very frustrating.
And I mean, that's not even the stuff that they've publicly have announced. There's things that they are working on in the back end that is top secret for eyes only, that aren't in any top secret database, and it's all on paper sitting in a SCIF somewhere locked behind, where only a few people really know what's going on, and then the people in that project. And so those are the real terrifying things, is like, what are they really working on the back end? And they're only showing us some of the public stuff. And so I think we're a lot closer, and it all lines up with Agenda 2030 and their whole goals of a global surveillance. And it all plays into that. And the fact that, now we have Musk here, who is 100% behind AI being the god over everything. And the whole transhumanistic aspect of it, and robots and I mean, again, and I always like to go back to like the Georgia Guidestones talked about how it said 500 million people, in perpetual balance worldwide. Well, to get really to that, you have to have a lot of people go away. And how to do that is you introduce bioweapons and diseases, and you can take people out and you replace them with AI and robots and other stuff so that certain fundamental aspects that we have grown accustomed to maintain. I mean, we're now starting to see a lot of people say, oh, like your day trade, those things are not going to go away. Well, not yet. But I've seen, machines now that can build, the structure of a home, that can do roofing. And so we're starting to get closer and closer to where you can autonomize even the building of an entire structure and only have a few people that is actually needed to finish the job versus a whole crew. And so we're definitely we're getting to that stance, and especially with Trump pushing Stargate and everything, that's going to be a big factor as well.
Well, yeah, I mean, we're close to. I saw a TV show at one point. It was a competition for entrepreneurs, but they're working on 3D printed houses.
Yep.
And a variety of other technologies. And I mean, you talked about on the institution side, we don't have obviously time to go through all of it. We already touched on the educational system and being used to promote compliance. And you talked about the Catholic Trivium versus the Austrian school. But where do you see education going moving forward to kind of further indoctrination? How do you see that playing
out? I think it's going to be more towards AI. And then it's however the AI is built to provide information, because it's not real intelligence, it's artificial, and so it's being scripted with a certain level of information. And I believe that is where they're going to start focusing, is they're going to dismantle potentially dismantle the entire Department of Education. And they say push it back to the states, but I don't see that happening. However, I do see them pushing like, hey, use these programs, use these efforts, and they're going to have AI come in behind to help start teaching people. And it's only going to be a very detailed, I mean, you can go into like ChatGPT or Gronk and ask it questions, and it's not going to provide you real answers. And it takes time and effort to work with it to really get the truth at it. And I've had conversations with like ChatGPT trying to get it to see my point of view, and it agrees with me, but at the same time doesn't, because it's programmed not to. And I think that's the danger, is that we're still going to have, it's still going to be used as a tool of indoctrination, because we've gotten away from parents actually being the educators or being local, versus now this system that is maintained by a federal system, the federal government.
Yep. Well, hey, Trump said they're going to end the Department of Education, so we'll see how that goes. Although that's trending downward on the prediction markets. I think that and you mentioned taxation. Obviously, taxation is theft, and the use of and the weaponization of taxation is a tool of compliance. And of course, I have to, and not only do I agree, but since May, I've been advocating for Roger Ver just on my own, independently, not as part of any official movement. But I was tracking CBDCs, and as I said, I was warning people that they're going to go after the Liberty crypto people, because that's where the threat is if you're trying to roll out a CBDC. So when Roger got arrested in Spain in May of last year, almost nobody was talking about it that much, because their assumption was that, oh yeah, they arrested him, but they're just doing this to negotiate a settlement. That was that's what everybody's reaction was. Oh yeah, they're just trying to get their pound of flesh. I'm like, this has nothing to do with collecting taxes. This has everything to do with Roger being the most effective person at promoting using cryptocurrency as an alternative to central bank, not even digital currency, just central bank money, period. That's why. And it turns out that read was correct, because he paid his tax. And I don't know how familiar you are with the story, but he basically is probably one of the only people to pay tax in 2014. They lied to the grand jury about even claiming that he was fraudulent with his taxes, because they didn't provide the communications and the discovery showing that he was working with 3 different layers of accountants and lawyers. They violated his rights by sending armed IRS agents to his lawyer's office and stole his private confidential material, which is a sacred, part of our legal process. And then now he's, I mentioned at the intro, he has this motion to dismiss coming up. And what the Department of Justice is now trying to say is he's a fugitive. They're saying because he's legally fighting his extradition in Spain, that now makes him a fugitive. So I was going to ask you about how they're using the IRS to drive behavior, but I've got to give that one example where it's undeniable that that's not about money. It's all about behavior, and it's all about having a chilling effect.
Yeah, I know. And I got into crypto in 2014, and I consider myself more of an early adopter with Bitcoin and using it as a tool, or of buying and selling and moving money around, and not a store of value that it's turned into. And so I've seen how it split off and how he went with BCH, and I honestly didn't even know that he had gotten arrested until too recently, because no one talked about it. And that's that just shows that mainstream media is woefully controlled by the powers that be, and they don't want that information. So it's all going to be kept hush hush, and that he really is being targeted more out of the idea of control, like you said. And they're just using taxation as a legal way to stifle his rhetoric and his views on things. And I mean, that's just the MO of government, is to do that. And it sucks that he has to go through it. And I hope he gets free, because again, taxation is theft. No one should be in jail for taxation or for screwing up, because I mean, the government has tens of thousands of tax laws, and you need to know all of them. And if you screw up anywhere, they can come and target you and attack you for it. But they don't have to tell you what they think you owe. And so it's set up so that you convict yourself and screw yourself up. And it's the same thing that police do all the time when they ask you questions, because they're trying to get you to incriminate yourself so that they can then arrest you and take money and control you. And it's just the same thing, but on a different scale.
Yeah, the tax code is 75,000 pages. It's 16 million words. There's no way, if they want to get you, they can get you, because you couldn't possibly comply with that. No, I mean, even a tax professional
doesn't know it all. Yeah,
doesn't know it all and can't stay on top of it. And it's absurd, and it is completely weaponized. You talk a lot in the book about psychological manipulation, and we've talked about some of those examples, and obviously we talk about COVID, and you even mentioned the idea that conspiracy theory itself is it's a CIA psyop, even kind of labeling things as a conspiracy theory. I guess, how can people protect themselves from this, from these psyops?
Yeah, the hard thing is that to protect yourself from it is that you have to be aware of it, and you have to be able to look out for it and identify it. And that's the only true way to protect yourself. And like I said, so like in my chapter, I do psychological operations. They have, and I'll just run through the different types that I identify. There's terrorism, different forms of propaganda. The government had, case in point is during the Iraq War. They paid a British firm, $500 million to create some Al-Qaeda videos. And some of those were the beheading videos that became viral. And some of those were fake and produced by this PR firm. And the government did that just to drum up support to be able to go into Afghanistan and Iraq. Then you have the disinformation from mainstream media, the fake news that they push. All mainstream media, all those corporations are all owned. When you go to the very top and see who owns it, again, it's the BlackRock, Vanguard, different people that have major ties to the Israeli government. They all sit at these positions of power. I mean, there's countless videos that you can go out there and see where there's news stations across the nation saying word for word, and different ones, Fox, MSNBC, all of these different stations that really, if they were independent, no way they should have the exact same broadcast. And these people are saying word for word, of an entire segment, and it just shows how they are all connected and they're all being funneled to show certain things. And so that's how they can control the masses of the rhetoric, because a lot of people, they only get their information from mainstream media, and so that's all they listen to, depending on which really what real focus point that comes from, Fox versus MSNBC or CNN. But other types of one is like mass psychosis, the drumming up fear that you saw during COVID, that people are willing to sacrifice their rights and things like that for the idea of safety. So they use mass psychosis as another thing. Another one is a limited hangout. A limited hangout is when someone presents truthful information, but it's in a very, very focused way, and they ignore all of the fakes, all of the real truth. And so they go, look, this is why it's happening. Well, yeah, this is true, but that's not the actual reason and it's happening. It's because of all of this. But they don't focus on that. So a limited hangout. I like to say that the idea of HARP, where everyone says that the government's controlling the weather and things like that. HARP is actually a limited hangout, and I discussed it in my first book, and I'd be happy to discuss it later, after this segment. But I do believe that that whole thing is a limited hangout for very specific reasons. But it just shows that Trump provides information that it's semi-true, and it's a limited hangout because the full truth might come out. And if they know that that's going to be really damaging to what their intended goal is, they'll release some of the truth and that get everyone just to focus on that. And then most people then ignore the rest of it. And so that's the idea of a limited hangout. So there was it's a special assistant to the deputy director of the CIA. And this was in 1978. A limited hangout is spy jargon for a favorite and frequently used gimmick of clandestine professionals. When their veil of secrecy is shredded and they can no longer rely on a phony cover story to misinform the public, they resort to admitting, sometimes even volunteering, some of the truth while still managing to withhold the key and damaging facts of the case. The public, however, is usually so intrigued by the new information that it never thinks to pursue the matter further. This was in 1978. They've only gotten better at all of this stuff. Next up would be like controlled oppositions, where they present people to like voting. And I go into like voting under conspiracy theories. I talk about voting fraud and things like that. And the idea of voting, well, if the RNC and the DNC have controlled opposition, people who will absolutely do what the intended goals for like Agenda 2030, but they will publicly tell everyone, oh no, I'm against vaccines, I'm against this, I'm here for your rights and freedom. But then when they get into office and they do the opposite, that is a controlled opposition. Next up would be like co-opted movements. So sometimes co-opted movements is like the BLM movement or Occupy Wall Street. And now they might have started out as a legitimate movement, but quickly diverted into a tool used to placate the masses and to further along the different agendas or whatever the goals are. So that's co-optation. And you have to assume that every movement, anything that could threaten government's control and power, they will absolutely put controlled opposition and try to co-opt the movement. That is just how PSYOPs works. Let's see. And then censorship, I've talked about it previously, that the government loves censoring things, suspending accounts, censoring accounts, social media accounts, things like that. That's just like modern day book burning. And they've been doing it for years, and it's not going to stop, even though that Trump's in office. They like to say it stopped. I mean, all the information from like the Twitter files came out, and that's how Musk was able to then buy Twitter and turn it into X. Well, I don't think he says that his platform now is all about free speech, but there's people constantly saying they're still getting suspended and still having their freedom of speech violated. And most likely, if you go back to it, he's so close to Trump now that you can't say that it is not a violation of the First Amendment, because the government is still absolutely influencing those policies. Let's see. I talk about.
Well, yeah, and in that example, even though he said that, and you know, when he didn't like something Laura Loomer said, he demonetized her and deboosted her. When there was a debate about immigration, he immediately canceled a whole bunch of accounts, like 4,000 accounts, and deboosted a bunch of people. I mean, even to the point where two of the women who have had his children have posted things, you know, trying to get a hold of him and made public statements, and then they immediately got deboosted on the platform. So it is clearly not an open free speech platform. It's clearly something that he can, at his individual discretion. And by the way, what bothers me about that is, I mean, the things that I speak out about are the things that are exactly, you know, in opposition to what his core agenda is. And so, you know, talking about CBDCs and central banks is something that, you know, even Chris Martinson mentioned to me. He's like, yeah, that gets deboosted. That's always been deboosted. It's kind of a frustrating thing. And you're right, that is the new censorship, or even whatever layer they put on the output for AI, that to me is also censorship. Because I look at, you know, search engines. I remember when search engines, you know, when I started my first company in like 1996, you know, we used InfoSeek, and, you know, you could just submit web pages to InfoSeek. So I had a thing where I was writing scripts, and I'm like, all right, well, we had a flower shop, so we wanted to figure out, you know, how to make the keyword flowers or roses appear at the top of the thing. And so people just put whatever they wanted in there, and then it was indexed. And it took a while. There was a little bit of a wild west for search, where, you know, kind of anything goes. And now you look at how
those days. I do miss those days.
I know, I completely miss those days. And now everything is sanitized, and now you have public health organizations and NGOs actually setting policy and getting higher rankings. But as bad as that is, the rate of censorship on AI actually is even faster. Like within 1 year, it went from relatively uncensored to completely almost unusable. ChatGPT was useful for me to do research when I did my first book. I could actually do things like, you know, find out what the sources were. This is before they had to hide the fact that they were using copyrighted material. So I would never trust any output from ChatGPT in the early days, but what I would ask it for is for references. So it would actually like spit out a bibliography, so that I could go and actually look at the primary source. And that was great for references. And I'm kind of like, hey, I want to find out who's been on the board of Club of Rome and the Council on Foreign Relations and the Trilateral Commission in Bilderberg, right? Who's been on all four boards? And it turns out it's this one woman who is from the Carnegie Foundation, who I'd never heard of before. Henry Kissinger had been on like 3 out of the 4. And then fast forward 6 months later, I can't get a response back on that query. And so that to me was, you know, and now of course there's competition. I'm not anti-AI. I'm for decentralized AI. I'm for.
I love the technology. It's very helpful. For an independent person trying to produce certain things, like it is very, very good and can be a very great tool. But it's definitely, it's like I always say, technology is a sword, and it'll cut both ways. So it'll definitely be used against you if it can, and it definitely is.
Yep. So we've talked about a lot. So let's move into solutions.
I do want to bring up just one more aspect, and we had talked about AI and then you can have like deep fakes where the government can use AI to generate you know fake videos or sounds or stuff like that. But I wanted to talk about sock puppet accounts. And so sock puppet accounts is fake online presence that looks legit. And there's war colleges, multiple different types of war colleges. All the different intelligence agencies use sock puppet accounts. There are so many sock puppet. I mean, there's tens of thousands of people worldwide, hundreds of thousands maybe, that are actively involved in this global aspect of intelligence apparatus. And there's a lot of people that are coming out that use these sock puppet accounts to help sway the masses. So when you see all of these accounts that almost look like bot accounts, however, they say one thing and they're like, oh, I'm mad about this and I'm angry about that. Well, that's just to help sway the masses. And there is by U.S. Central Command, there was an Operation Earnest Voice that allowed agents to create and manage sock puppet accounts to influence foreign and domestic targets on social media platforms. So they're using taxpayer money to then lie to people through these sock puppet accounts, and they're on all the social media platforms. And so really, when you're interacting with people online or even arguing with them, there's no guarantee that that's not really a Fed. And how they like to, I always like to say, I'm like, everyone's a Fed online. Can't trust anyone because, I mean, unless you know them personally, but even then, there's no guarantee. So that's really about action. How are they? Are they really principled or not? And most people aren't. And again, these sock puppet accounts, it's dangerous because it spreads the disinformation, misinformation, and it convinces people of something that isn't true. And so I just wanted to bring up that is a really big thing that most people don't fully grasp on how massive of a psychological operations campaign that is going on to people worldwide based on this stuff.
Yeah, it's not, and again, it's not even just governments that use these tactics. It's also used in commercial settings as well. Roger actually talks in his book Hijacking Bitcoin about how propaganda and censorship was used during the fork wars for Bitcoin. And I want to say, I mean, you mentioned earlier that Roger's kind of Bitcoin Cash. It turns out Roger's like, people don't know this. Roger was the first investor and was really like the #2 person at XRP. He's invested in like multiple privacy coins. Like he is not a maximalist of any kind. He's a maximalist for the adoption of peer-to-peer cash. And so, recently he's moved into some privacy coins like Xano and Confidential Air. So he is not he gets pigeonholed that way. People try to make it about that. And he has been consistent from the very first talk that I heard him say in 2012 to his Tucker Carlson interview a few months ago. He's literally been saying and doing the same things. And a lot of the misconception around that is because of the propaganda and censorship. There were people kicked off of Reddit. There have been other people. There have been sock puppet accounts, people that tried to call it Bcash and do all these other things, but it was all very deliberate. And the book outlines some of the tactics. Some of it involved outright denial of service attacks and even some other layers. This is not just a government issue by any stretch of the imagination. These tactics are deployed widely in a variety of settings. And it really, and it's actually hard to know I don't know what percentage of my traffic or my engagement is fake. I have no idea. I have literally no idea. I mean, there may be, it says I have 44,000 followers. I may have like 8 followers. I don't know how much of this is not real. And so,
well, they do say that eventually it's going to be a black hole where it's just AI generating AI and it's all not real content, and that it's just becoming more and more of that. It's just continuously growing. And again, I think it's partly on purpose because then it confuses people and it makes things so that people don't know what's really going on and they don't have the information. I mean, again, you have intelligence agencies, private and officially sanctioned, government agencies, intelligence agencies pushing all of this stuff too. And so really, and again, now with AI, who knows how much control out there is really being done. I mean, and then I look at how the cryptocurrencies are, and they have AI to help manage those markets on, hey, when are we going to dump all of this money and buy up all of these things so that it seems like, Bitcoin's going up to 100,000, but they don't actually have to spend that much money. They just have to buy what's on the board, and it drives up the price. And then people start going, oh, and I got to buy in because I don't want to lose it. And eventually I think they're going to tank it to help try to drive towards the CBDCs. And
Well, I agree with that. I mean, the Bitcoin market is completely rigged. You have Tether, which is, I didn't even know what it is. Last time I checked, it was $140 billion. And they've never been able to pass an audit, and they are owned by a company that owns a crypto exchange. There was a study in 2017 that found that something like 70% of the increase in the price of Bitcoin during that bull run could be tracked to Tether. So if you actually have a situation where there's somebody printing a stable coin out of thin air, I mean, and to think about how meta that is, you have something backed by a Ponzi scheme, fiat. And then you're printing something on top of that that's not even backed by the Ponzi scheme. And then you're using that to buy another digital asset. It's like the actual amount of fraud here could be absolutely ridiculous. And most of these crypto markets, it's not like crypto exchanges, they don't have to follow. I mean, they follow a fractional reserve model. There's no one-to-one back, like in every crypto exchange is collapsed. So I think that there's clearly a setup coming, and very hard and frustrating because, like you said, what drives most crypto. I tell people this. I hate bull markets in crypto because people ignore anything regarding adoption, anything involving new technology, and they focus on influencers pushing pump and dump schemes. And it's so frustrating to watch. And so now we have presidents of nations doing this.
The way Argentina's president, that everyone likes to say he was an anarchist and a libertarian, which I think he is controlled up pushing, because his whole government is pushing AI as well. And he just backed the coin that got rug pulled on people. And now Trump has his own coin. And so it's all just the same pattern in moving forward. And I really do think it's the force adoption. And then they're going to rug pull it all, because then it drives the fear and regulations behind it, so that people go, no, we really do need a CBDC that's backed by the government, because that's what will protect us from these markets going crazy like this.
Yep, I agree. Yeah, I agree. That's my thesis as well. And in fact, when you read, this tells you how much of how's this for a psyop? There are two stablecoin bills right now. The House has a stablecoin bill called Stable, and the Senate has a stablecoin bill called Genius. Literally, you can't make this up. But when you analyze the bills, and I'm working on an article on this, gives control to banks, gives regulatory oversight to the Federal Reserve. It attacks and tries to shut down decentralized finance. It's bad for privacy. Like it's actually worse than the bills that had been proposed in Congress under Biden, and it's all Republican led, and everybody's like, oh, our crypto AI czar says this is going to be the future, and it's just and it's actually tragic, because
it's because most people don't actually know how to analyze legislative bills. I've probably analyzed over 1,000 of them over more than a decade of system impacts and potential of what changes do they really mean and things like that. And when you dive into stuff like that, most people don't want to take the time and effort to read. And because some of these bills, they're so long and detailed that it could take hours and hours and hours to just get through it once. And then you have to analyze, well, what do they really mean by this? What is this arbitrary sentence that is very subjective in the way? How is some government agency or the Federal Reserve going to take that? And because they make it so ambiguous, so that it can be then the board of the agency or the Federal Reserve can interpret it however they want, and then that doesn't have to be public. And so that's just why it just shows that the masses are uninformed. And to really hold government accountable, you need an informed populace, which we don't have. And you'll never have that, just because that's the nature of government.
No, and in fact, that's been dropping. I mean, even though it's propaganda, I mean, you look at the scores on civics and history tests and everything else, like we're at all-time lows. It's been plummeting. We have I think it's some 71% can't name the 3 branches of government. Like it's that level of a lack of knowledge and understanding. And so it is almost impossible to talk to people about this stuff, because they don't even have a framework. They don't even know what kind of government it's supposed to be based on what the propaganda is, let alone what it actually is. and so it's frustrating, because I mean, I like to, analyze. I write these articles and end up being like 5,000, 9,000 word articles. And I'm like, oh, here's all of the information on it. And it's like, and I know most people aren't going to read it. It's good to have as foundational material, and then, then I can make memes off of it or whatever. But it's complex, and there's so many layers. You have to understand how fiat works before you can even understand how bad a stable coin is, or a CBDC. And, and they don't teach you this anywhere. Nobody teaches you that money is created in an Oracle database.
There's
I
no
mean,
real there's no value to it. I mean, even gold is a very subjective value because they store it, and yes, you can do things with it, and that's what makes it valuable. It's what you can do with something. So like to me, I think what's more valuable and will be more valuable leading in the future are things like eggs, chickens, stuff that you can farm and grow, because that's a way to be self-sufficient, and that's the true value of things. And but however, I do love any aspect of a medium of exchange because it gives me more options. And so like I'm all for barter and trade, I'm all for crypto, I'm all for, I mean, even fiat, but with the understanding that there's no intrinsic value behind it except burning it. I can burn it, that gives me heat, that's its only real value. The value is what someone else is willing to give me for it.
yep.
And that's what creates that value, but it's purely subjective. And then when a system collapses, I mean, you have 37 trillion as the national debt. The dollar is just going to continuously collapse. There is no saving the US dollar. It is going
Correct.
to collapse. It's just about when are they going to do a controlled demolition and flip that switch to a new, whatever the CBDC is called, however they decide to package that and hand it over. And that's really what people need to be looking out for, is that, and preparing themselves, because that's what's coming and there's no stopping that. There's no saving it. They could reduce it. I mean, look how like they say Doge is saving and cutting all of this spending and all of this stuff. But then you look at, since Trump has been in office, government spending on the actual like books has significantly increased versus how Biden's government was spending. So, and then you see what the Republicans just push forward, trillions and trillions of more spending, and they're going, oh well, we're going to save you like $4 trillion over the next 20 years based on these tax cuts. And I'm like, yeah, but in 2 years you're going to spend more than all of that. In 1 year you might spend more than 4 trillion and of increased spending. So really it's all just a lie, and people are falling for it, thinking that they're being saved and that everything is going to magically get better.
Yeah, well, it's like, and Massey was the only Republican to vote against it. And he said, this adds this much to the deficit this year, this much next year. And he's like, I've been here for a long time and I've never seen a 10-year project. If you look at the history of the track record of somebody making a 10-year projection and then what actually happens, there's a 0% success rate. There's a 0% chance that it's going to go as
worse.
It's always worse. And so yeah, I mean, we're not going to vote our way out of it, but what do you see as the solution? I know you talk about something called facilitatism, but what do you see as the way out of this?
So the way out is actually forward, is you have to go through a collapse. I mean, I'm a collapsitarian. I'm waiting for it. I'm welcoming it. It needs to collapse. That is the only way to move forward. And during a economic upheaval like that, that is the only time true evolution can really take place. And it has to be, we have to understand what's possible, prepare for it. And then when that happens and a collapse does happen and we have the chance to move forward, that's when you try to seize it. And you don't revolve back to an earlier form of statism. You have to get these new things in place. You have to move forward. And like I said, I say facilitatism just by giving it a term and an idea, like identity tracking. I, as a property owner, I want to make sure that no one can steal my identity. I want to make sure no one can just come and take my property. So there has to be some form of system that allows for that to take place. And blockchain is a great form of technology that you can make it immutable, so to speak. I mean, I'm sure there's always ways around it, and there's always going to be people trying to corrupt a system, but it needs to be in a voluntary aspect. It can't be forced. You can't charge someone like how the DMV in Washington State. I just paid almost $200 for my car to get a stupid sticker on it. And you have to do that every single year. And that money gets swept into the general fund. It doesn't really go to the roads, because I mean, we have one of the highest gas taxes, and that's supposed to go to the roads. So it just shows that they are trying to pull money, and it's more about collecting money so they can do more things. And it doesn't mean that those things are going to benefit you, and it's not for the intended purpose. So like, really, if you were going to register a car in a system, you might pay a service fee to enter it in because someone's going to process it, and then it's there. You shouldn't have to renew. You shouldn't have to do anything. It should just be in there until you sell it to someone else, and then you do a transaction and maybe another service fee, and then that's at it. And again, it is a voluntary aspect. I shouldn't be forced to register my car. If I don't want to register my car, then I shouldn't have to. But if I want to make sure that that car is registered to me, so if someone takes it, I can get it back if it's found, then that's why I think those type of systems should still exist, but it can't be through force and control like it is now. And so it's just really taking what's their industry standards, certifications. You can even apply it towards like health aspects for like restaurants. So you go, hey, these are our community standards, our industry standards on how you can maintain a proper kitchen so you don't make your customers sick, because businesses have the duty to make sure that they're not killing their clients. They have a duty to protect their customers. And so these industry standards provide a due diligence aspect to it, so that when some accident happens because someone mismanaged it and some people got sick and maybe died, now you can really tell the difference between criminal neglect versus a pure accident, and that they had done their due diligence. It was an unfortunate accident. And then that really then plays into how restitutions happen, because that's the real thing is when victims are created, you need to have restitutions that bring balance back to society and the economic aspect of people interacting with other people. And so that's the whole idea about facilitatism is really around industry standards and things like that we do need to function and work together, but it can't be based on government control like it is now. And because again, government loves to find new markets, new industries, and then they regulate the crap out of it. And then people start adding arbitrary laws and they start enforcing things based on some subjective opinion somewhere. And, they're like, oh, well, let's take the cannabis industry. They regulate it and they say, well, we got to make sure that you're not doing diversion, and you're not sending money or sending these drugs to the streets because kids are going to get it. And I'm like, but you can grow it. It's a plant. It's already there. Like, it shouldn't be regulated like that. And so it's just those type of things of, we do need systems to help maintain things, but it has to be viewed in a different light.
Yeah, I've looked into this a lot. I've actually been pursuing this kind of alternate structure thing since about 2019. And I first stumbled into, and it actually relates to tokenizing assets, because I exited I was heavily involved in politics for a long time, and I realized there's no political solution. And I liked the idea of Bitcoin and the ability to apply blockchain to not just money. Money only represents 5% of total assets, but to be able to use blockchain for, land titling, to use it for capital markets, to use it, everywhere there are third parties involved in every part of the economy. And most of those third parties are the source of fraud, corruption, abuse, and waste. And so blockchain has the ability to resolve some of that. And I found this blockchain called Ravencoin, which allows you to do tokenization. It's a fork of Bitcoin. But what was interesting about it, it was part of Patrick Burns. He had Overstock.com, and he was turning the e-commerce business into a blockchain business. He formed this thing called Medici Ventures, and he created this keiretsu of companies. And he had this whole concept of a blockchain tech stack for human civilization. So it's like, here's how you use the blockchain for voting. Here's how you use it for supply chain. It was great. I mean, it was a brilliant vision. And I actually think he got psyoped out of Overstock multiple different ways. It might possibly be one of the biggest rug pulls in crypto that no one talks about because of all of the different aspects of it. But I've talked to a lot of people, because this is a passion area. And it's not only Sterling, but I've also talked to Ray Youssef, who is working on something called No Ones, which is a peer-to-peer platform in the global South and focusing on Africa. And he's building these different solutions. And I talked to him about it, and he said, one of the things that I will say that we do need to solve, and I say this as somebody who's been in the Liberty community, as much as we talk about a lot of these ideas, we do a horrible job of self-regulation. I have never seen any dispute resolution mechanism that's been put in place has turned into a shit show. I have no other way to describe it than that. And there's almost no accountability. And part of it is just, a lot of people are like, well, we're a liberty movement. We don't want to draw negative attention to ourselves. And so people kind of gloss over it. But I mean, I've heard this, you can see this in everywhere. If you watch the Anarchapulco documentary on HBO, to some things that I've experienced here. And a lot of this does come down to alternative dispute resolution systems in addition to blockchain technology. And I don't think that's been cracked yet. I think that's an area that is really open for exploration and for work, because I'd say in the liberty community, in fact, it usually gets so bad that there's so little accountability that the state ends up having to step in, and that's what's actually very tragic about it. And so it would be really useful if we could actually, just even on a small scale. This is why I like what Sterling's working on, because there's Logos and Polis, and I think the idea is they're building technology tools and things to try to address some of this, but I think there needs to be a cultural dynamic of how do we voluntarily enforce how do we get a voluntary system of accountability,
that's kind of like touch base and I only talk about these type of systems in the very last chapter, so I only touch base briefly, because to really find a good solution, you need to know the root cause of a problem. And most people in the liberty community are still stuck are their status. They're minarchists up, and it's either statism or anarchism. There's no in between. You either are for government control in some limited fashion to fully, or you're not. And so you need to understand that the idea of government, it's a fallacious belief. And once you can truly understand that, then you can actually sit down with people who also understand that that's the root cause of the problems to find a real solution. And it can't involve this aspect of control and force and a monopoly on violence. It has to be through voluntary means and exchanges. And that's the key difference. That, again, like my takeaway from PorcFest, everyone was super nice, at least for the most part. Everyone was great there, and especially the people running it. But they're full of status. They still think and believe that they can change government for the better. And so when you have people like that saying that, hey, I want to help with a solution, they focus on either they don't want to do hands off, like you mentioned, or they want to involve some type of level of control. And that's why you're going to get conflicts. And it's hard to move forward with any real solution because of that mentality. So you have to get through that mentality and understand the root cause of the problem. Then you can provide a real solution to whatever you're trying to build, whatever software solution. And most likely that is going to be the key aspect, because you can create processes and I say governance in some aspect of how a process can be handled. You can write that down and you can workflow it, but you still need to develop the tool to help facilitate that process.
Yep. Yeah. No. And of course, anarchy it's no rulers, but there's still rules, right? There's still
rules, principles. There's still all of those things. You can still have leaders. There's still hierarchies. It can't be through force and violence. It can't be through control. It has to be a voluntary aspect. And that's the hard thing, is trying to get that through to people, because people still believe in government. In some, like I meet so many people that they're like, oh, I'm a minarchist. And I'm like, but that's still statism. That eventually leads back to tyranny. So what are you going to do? That's not the solution.
Yeah, no, and the Free State Project, there's definitely a mix. I myself thought that there was the opportunity to work within the system and tried it. And so did my wife for a while. And then, and I could write books and books of practically how it doesn't work. At this point, it's like, all right, I've tried that. And so there's a broad base of people within the Free State movement, but there are a lot of people that actually, they view anarchy as no rules and no rulers. And like there is that component of it as well. There's also a component of liberty people drawing people that got into trouble for something, but they're not broadly applying the concept of liberty. Like they're big for, and they want entitlement programs. So it's like, okay, they want weed legalized, and which, by the way, is also problematic, because they want it they're okay with taxing and regulating, which is also not the way, right? Mm-hmm. It's a plant. There shouldn't be taxing and regulating, but then they're okay with these social programs and these welfare programs. And it's been very perplexing for me. And a lot of it has been trying to find, and I like what Sterling gave me a book list. And so I'm actually only part of the way through it, but he's a wealth of knowledge. And there's a book that I'm reading that suggests that, you know, and I've seen this in corporate settings as well. Once you get beyond like 140 people, it's hard to keep an organization together.
Yeah.
And things start to break down.
The leadership aspect of it, the people towards the top. I mean, again, like especially in government where they promote problematic people, they promote up. And once you get up to a certain level, then you're just promoted up and out. And that's the easiest way to get rid of trouble people. But then there's a lot of leadership, even in corporate settings, that aren't very good, but they had a buddy that got them into that position, and they're not very good at it, and they're not good leaders. They're not good at their job, but they're there making these decisions, and that's how things just get corrupt and fall apart.
Yep. Yeah. That I did see. I was at the Red Pill Expo with Griffin, G. Edward Griffin, and who wrote Creature of Jekyll Island, and he's working on this new red pill concept, and he's working on and he's come up with some really interesting principles and ideas for how people can act locally, but even for how his organization, how this decentralized organization could be structured. And he's put a lot of time into this problem of knowing that the people that are attracted to power tend to be psychopaths. How do you fix all of that? How do you have remedies? And so he's put a lot of thought into it. I got to remember the name of it, something chasm. I mean, he's actually written a short book on it, but it had some good ideas. You know, I think it's useful. I'm glad that we've been able to have this conversation. I think it's going to be useful to get a bunch of us together with Sterling and others.
Absolutely, I would love to. I like I said, I've spent the last 13 years in just pure software development and being an analyst, working on requirements and how systems work and things like that. So I would love to solutionize things, especially with people that also believe that the government is a bad idea and is a fallacious idea, because then we can actually focus on true solutions to problems. Because I mean, I don't even know how many times people go, oh, and what about the roads? Or, hey, solve any number of XYZ problem that government can't solve, but I need to solve it as a reason or proof that we don't need government. And so, yeah, I would love to start meeting up and linking up for some of this stuff.
That's great. Well, I know we've been going for a while now. I just had a couple more things, I guess. So what is the single most important concept that you hope readers take away from your book?
I mean, honestly, it's the title, The Fallacious Belief in Government, that it doesn't matter how a government starts or where it's at, it always ends in tyranny, and that the only true path forward is building our skill sets in critical thinking and moving towards a free and organized society based on voluntary exchanges and cooperation that help maintain natural rights that are inherent in everyone, not just Americans, not just, XYZ people, but all people have inherent natural rights, life, freedom, property. Everyone does. And so that needs to be understood. And those are the big things that I think that people should take away from the book. Everything else in it is just evidence based on grammar and the logic, and then basically anecdotal evidence to prove those points. And that's what the whole book is. But those are the big things, is that there is a way forward. We can evolve. We shouldn't re-evolve, because again, that's just to an earlier form of statism. We have to evolve as a species past this need to be controlled. And again, that the only way to do that is moving forward and continuously moving forward, not trying to revert back to some earlier form of government control that someone thinks is the better form.
Yep. So if somebody is starting to question their beliefs about government, what other books would you recommend besides yours?
I mean, honestly, I don't read too many other people's stuff. I just don't have time, and I like to try to figure out my own rhetoric. And this is kind of just stuff I've looked and researched and went through my own process and wrote my own things. I know Sterling's book is really good. I have it still sitting right here on my desk. I just haven't picked it up and read it. Same thing. I have a bunch of other books. There's a lot of books out there. It really depends on where you're trying to go, and what you want to dive into. But I think people should be trying to come up with their own rhetoric, because I think that's the problem, is people get too stuck in reading some other people's stuff, and they go, hey, that this is the only way forward, versus, well, maybe some of the stuff they wrote was incorrect. Maybe it is wrong. So it's more about, like, do your own research type thing. I know they always say, like, Rothbard, Ayn Rand, there's a bunch of books out there that touch base on this stuff, but I think there's only probably a few that really go to the principled aspect of it.
Yep. That's very true. And you can go down a lot of rabbit holes, and you can get into a lot of different areas, and hopefully you don't get too fragmented or locked into a particular belief system, but because it's
Yep.
easy to do, a lot of fragmentation. What final thoughts would you like to share about?
Really just all of my work is on journalisticrevolution.com. I have a lot of articles up there that you can see my progression of what I've learned and researched and kind of redid. I have my COVID-19 book. I cover 141 published journal studies throughout it, and I have a total of 182 references in that book. So it's super detailed if you want, like, good, like, scientific information, stuff like that. This book, again, is available in paperback, ebook, and it's also on Spotify as an audiobook. I'll be converting my COVID-19 one into audiobook probably in the next few months as well, because I found a way to do that so it's not costing me like $1,500, because that's typically what audiobooks cost. So there's a good AI tool that actually sounds really good, that I converted this one into an audiobook. Besides that,
yeah.
Sorry.
I was gonna say there wasn't an AI option when I did my audio.
Yeah, it was 11. What is it? I'll let you know. 11labs.io, and you spell out 11, so ELEVEN labs.io, and they're actually really good for it, and they actually work with what is it? The findawayvoices.com, which is a distributor for audiobooks, and Spotify and a few other ones will accept digital voices from 11 Labs. Amazon, Audible, and a few others do not. They require still a human narration, so that's why it's only on Spotify, and like audiobooks.com. But so that's pretty much where I am, and I mostly operate in Instagram under Jeffrey.A.Hann or at Journalistic Revolution, and then I'm on X with Jeffrey Hann, MADA, for Make America Defiant Again, and you'll see that I have a design from one of my articles that I wrote, and it's a upside down American flag with Make America Defiant on it, so you'll notice that it's definitely me. And those are my two main ones. I used to use Twitter a lot more, but in 2019 they suspended my account for some reason. I still don't know why, and I know that was because I had just written an article on the measles and informed consent and vaccinations, and I focused on the MMR vaccine, and that's what really got me into understanding how corrupt the medical industry was that article. And then that was a perfect timing, because then shortly after that COVID hit, and I was well versed in not trusting anything that they were saying. So kind of like worked out for me.
Well, that's great. Well, I really do appreciate the time, and I do want to highly recommend this book. I have read the book. I've got it up on the screen now. It is on Amazon. It's also, you can actually get it for free as part of the Kindle Unlimited thing as well. And
same thing with my COVID book. It's under the Kindle Unlimited.
Yep. So again, it's The Fallacious Belief in Government, Warp Speed Toward Tyranny. If you are listening to this and not watching it, because I actually will publish this on Spotify and a variety of other channels, iTunes and everything else. And so just in case case you want the name of it, it's The Fallacious Belief in Government, Warp Speed Toward Tyranny. Thank you again, Jeff, for the time. And I'm going to, as we exit out, unless you have any other comments, I'm going to play another song on the way out, and we will take it from there.
Thank you for having me. It was a lot of fun. I look forward to doing it again sometime.
Awesome. Thank you. Have a good one.
You too.
Bye.
From Silicon Valley to the Spanish shore, fighting for freedom, but they want something more. 10 months in prison just for speaking his mind. Now they're coming back trying to leave him behind. 109 years for following the law. Most corrupt case that you ever saw. They can't silence the truth, they can't change what's right. Bitcoin Jesus showed us all how to stand up and fight. Free, free Roger Ver. Free Roger now. Hired the best lawyers, did everything right. Still they raided offices in the dead of night. Used his own compliance as evidence of guilt. Now his freedom hangs on the empire they build. Speaking truth to power comes with a price, but we won't let them sacrifice. Oh, they can't silence the truth, they can't change what's right. Bitcoin Jesus showed us all how to stand up and fight. Free Roger now. When they come for one of us, they come for all. Either stand together now or watch freedom fall. They can't silence the truth, they can't change what's right. Bitcoin Jesus showed us